Welcome back to Inside the Industry, a student-driven platform committed to equipping aspiring individuals with resources for navigating the pharmaceutical industry. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on post notifications, and like and reshare our videos. We're driven to help all of the pharmacy students that are interested in the pharmaceutical industry, so feel free to reach out. We're here to help, and thank you for your continued support and watching all of our videos.
Welcome back to Insight into Industry. My name is Talia, and I'm alongside my fellow classmate, Ravi, and we're both second-year pharmacy students at the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. And today we're joined by Dr. Raena Rhone, a Medical Science Liaison at Bristol Myers Squibb. Dr. Rhone graduated from UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy in 2020, and she directly entered into a clinical residency at Memorial Health and taught at FAMU before joining Bristol Myers Squibb. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Rhone.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
So I guess kind of just to dive in, can you tell us a little about your journey into pharmacy school?
Sure. So I think maybe a lot of folks will share this sentiment, but I always knew that I kind of wanted to help folks. Probably in healthcare, I was obsessed with my AP bio class. I knew I wanted to do something in medicine or science. And so I was kind of exploring different careers in undergrad. I went to Baylor University for undergrad in Texas. And I realized that pharmacy had so many different pathways. I knew that, the way that I thought and saw myself in the future, I wanted to work on projects. I wanted to move around. I wanted to have different career opportunities with whatever career I chose for myself. And I knew pharmacy had a lot of different options. And so I also will say that my mom is a pharmacist. So that was always, kind of top of mind. And I saw that she actually started her career in the pharmaceutical industry and knew that that was an option. So I was excited to kind of explore that all pharmacy entailed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And that's cool that it started that early. And I guess kind of just once you got into pharmacy school, what kind of activities and organizations were you involved in during your time there?
Sure. So I was heavily involved. I think, I was given the advice of trying different things, see what you really like to do, because that was actually what helped me to kind of get onto my professional journey even after pharmacy school. So I was involved with SNAPHA, or Student National Pharmaceutical Association. I started off as a general member, and then I progressed. I was president-elect and then president of my chapter at UNC, and then actually served on the national board in my final year. So that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed serving the underserved. I was specifically the national corresponding secretary on the national board. And I was also involved. I started my second year, the summer after the first year, as a hematology and oncology intern at UNC hospitals. And so I really enjoyed that experience, learned, the ins and outs of the clinical setting, did compounding chemotherapy and worked with the teams to kind of come up with the therapy plans for the patients, and got a taste of the different options within clinical pharmacy specific to hemonc. And so those are like the two biggest opportunities that I think that I was involved with that kind of shaped my career path in terms of the therapeutic area I wanted to kind of think about going into, and also some of the key skills that I wanted to develop as well. So from SNAPHA, learning about, project management, people management, networking and working with teams, inspiring teams, and then even down to the nitty gritty of the clinical side with the internship. Was involved with some other things, but those were the two main activities that I participated in.
That's awesome. Those sound really great. And that's cool. You're able to specialize that early on, kind of get that therapeutic area honed in on.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, like Talia said, that's really cool. And I think it's really interesting that you're able to kind of hone in on, a disease state that you found interesting. And we're able to take that even, post-graduation into, clinical residency, and then, now into, fellowship and as an MSL. But one thing that really caught my eye is volunteering. So volunteering is, something for me that many students kind of forget about when they're in a professional program. I saw you volunteered at PILS. And that's something new to me. And I was kind of wondering if you could talk more about that, especially you being a UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy grad, how students here could get involved with that as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I absolutely love volunteering as well. I think it's so important. And as pharmacists, we're entering into a career of service. And so I involved in all that I could. So in terms of pills, this is something I actually got exposed to during pharmacy school in my final year. And so really this organization helps to help students, especially minority students, get into the pharmaceutical industry. And so there's a lot of mentors in place in order to help them. And so I became the coach of the mentorship program actually after leaving pharmacy school and in my residency program. And so I was able to kind of organize a group of mentors to mentor students in a very tailored way in order to help them land their various fellowship programs that they were interested in. This even included folks who maybe had started their residencies already and were looking for a pathway into industry. And so that's how I got involved with pills. I absolutely love mentoring still to this day. Still not currently part of pills now, but I do love to mentor and help students whenever I can, because it's so nice to be able to pay it forward. So because so many people help me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. I really do appreciate that's something that was new to me, and I'm sure would be useful for many students that, come into, the next PY1 class that comes in, and, students that are further down in their academic career here at ESOP.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. And I guess I had a question because you mentioned how you decided hematology and that oncology space was for you. I guess what specifically drew you to that therapeutic area?
Oh man. So a little disclaimer, I knew nothing about hemonc before I, started that position. It was a highly competitive internship. But I knew that it was going to be challenging, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to just really step outside of my comfort zone, do something totally new, see if I liked it. I think students sometimes miss out on opportunities because they're afraid to try things that they're not sure if they're going to like or not. But honestly, that information is just as valuable as doing the things you love, like even if you don't like it. I happen to love it. So what I loved seeing was the full process within hematology and oncology pharmacy. So again, compounding the medications, delivering the medications to patients, working with the nurses, the doctors, and then also like the counseling and coming up with the treatment plans, of course, under the supervision of other pharmacists, etc. But I think just the complexity of that disease state, what the patients go through, it's chronic, so you get to build relationships with the patients, is really key as well. And then just the fast-paced environment, like with hemonc, you all probably have seen like the NCCN guidelines and how complex they are, but it's amazing how quickly they are updated because there's so much investment in making sure we have good therapies for patients with cancer. And so that's kind of what stuck with me. It's just the patients, working with caregivers, and just the complexity and challenge of it all.
Yeah, thank you. That's an awesome perspective that, like the relationship aspect as well. Yeah, that's great. And I guess kind of jumping off that, as we saw your fourth year, like we have a grit, and at ESOP, we're able to explore a bunch of different functional areas for our fourth year rotations. And I guess I was just kind of curious about, like, it seems like you have some really cool rotational experiences for your fourth year. I was just curious if you had any advice for students when applying or deciding on which experiences to pursue for their rotations and how to kind of think about that.
Sure. So I say be smart and have fun. So what I mean by that is be smart in the sense of, if you have the option, try to get rotations in the things that you're interested in. So for instance, I knew I wanted, and that was tailored to your career path. So for me, I knew I wanted to go into industry. So I tried to get some rotations within the industry environment and also with the FDA, because I knew that those two, went hand in hand. And so I was able to do both of those, those rotations. Not all students will have that opportunity, and that's totally fine. You do not have to have industry rotations to land a fellowship. I've mentored several students who've had no industry experience and did just fine. Awesome. But it does give you an idea of what you like, because maybe you don't actually like it once you get there. It's nice to try it out. But I fell in love with it all. The second part, have fun. So I also did some interesting rotations. One was within abroad rotation. So I went to Japan for a month for one of my rotations, and I absolutely loved it. And the reason I chose Japan, we have a lot of different rotations we could choose that are international rotations. I wanted to be in a place that had a language barrier that I would struggle with. And, I knew no Japanese, but the idea was that, working at the hospital, I knew that there were a lot of patients who didn't speak English, and I wanted to know what that felt like to not, to have that language barrier, right? Because you can think, you know how it feels, but you may not know. And so for me, I wanted to experience that. I wanted to struggle through it. I wanted to learn through it. And it gave me such an appreciation, for the folks at home who struggle with that language barrier. It gives me more empathy, but also gives me that challenge and taught me that people are so connected in other ways, even if language is difficult. For me, in my role, I have to communicate a lot. And so even when there are barriers, in this case, there was a language barrier I had to work through. So it helped me to develop that skill as well. So outside of that, of course, having fun, I think in your fourth year, it's really important to try to have fun, because this is the last chance you really get to do things out of the ordinary, because after that, it's kind of working life for a while. All right. So that's kind of how I tailored my fourth year, even though a lot of what I did was very non-traditional.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. And that's so cool you were able to go into it thinking that that's what you'd get. That's just awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Sure.
And kind of going off what you just said, your journey being, unorthodox and unique. While you went through your fourth year rotations, it looks like obviously you went into a clinical PGY1 residency. And I kind of was trying to, I would like to get kind of your perspective on what your goals were going into that residency, and if you knew when going into that residency that your long-term career interests were industry, and kind of how that kind of pathway led itself.
Sure. I'll be brutally honest here. I was not expecting to go into a residency. So in my year, and I guess it's kind of coming back to some extent, everybody pursuing fellowships would go to mid-year. Once you get to mid-year, you interview like crazy. I think I had 16 interviews in like 3 days. And, it's just a madhouse. It was a great experience, but a madhouse. And you go in with a certain ranking, but it's so key to be open-minded. So I did not rank the program that I did first, because I was like, no, I just want to go into industry. I wanted to do a fellowship. That's it. It was on my list because I had a chance to work with very closely the team that led the program during an API rotation I had at BMS. And I loved the team, but I just didn't want to do the clinical year. I knew that I wanted to go the industry route long term. So I ranked those programs, and knowing I wanted to be an MSL, I started to interview for different MSL focused fellowships. And a lot of the folks I interviewed with, they actually were clinical pharmacists or had a clinical background before becoming MSLs. So I realized that, man, maybe it's actually important to get clinical experience first before going into industry. And I was so glad that I did. Very challenging, program, very rigorous, but I have to say that it was so valuable, because you don't realize how much you don't fully know in pharmacy school until you start your residency. And, I'm sure as you continue on, but there's just so much more to learn. And I'm so glad I had the opportunity to kind of dive into that, be challenged with that, understand the language of what goes on in the hospital. And so much so that, the interviews that I had for MSL roles, I talked more about my first year in the clinical setting than even my industry fellowship year, because I can really relate on that level to providers. I was challenged. I had so many different experiences. And even in my conversations today as an MSL, that's really how I relate with the providers I work with. So that's kind of why I went down that route. And I'm so glad that I did.
That's really cool. And I think that's really valuable experience. And it's going to kind of get to my next question in that, do you feel like you're able to leverage those clinical experiences, those decisions you made as a clinician, the thought process that you had as a clinician, or, your coworkers, to provide input, while working in industry, that, oh no, this is how we're actually thinking in a clinical setting, or this is what we see in a clinical setting. Did you find that to be really useful?
Absolutely. And in so many other ways too. It definitely makes you allows you to bridge the gap. Like a lot of the folks that I work with, we bring different perspectives. So there's PhDs on my team, there's APPs like PAs and NPs. And so, obviously pharmacists. So we all have different perspectives and approaches, but the value of coming from a clinical setting really allows you to have that clinical perspective and knowing what your customers are thinking, right? Or having a better idea at least, and some of the challenges they face, right? A lot of my teammates may not know if someone's flustered with what Epic is doing that day, or you know what I mean? They don't know what that means, but I can joke around with the providers who are talking about that because I dealt with the same thing, right? So it just allows you to talk the talk, get on the same page with them, and allows them to feel more connected to you. It's not everything, right? But it certainly helps, and it allows you to understand better what they're going through and what their patients might be facing as well, just by having that clinical experience. And then kind of like you said as well, it definitely helps to kind of bring attention to the team about what they might, kind of more of a reality check almost, right? What's most important for the provider, the patient, because sometimes we can kind of get in our own zones in industry.
No, definitely. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really, I've started my IPE today actually, and it's really interesting to see how clinicians think. And I always go into my, I went into my IPE, I'm like, please give me your perspective on the pharmaceutical industry and, how that process goes. It's really cool to see how clinicians think and how they can provide that expertise to other individuals.
Absolutely. And even to your point, is, sometimes people already have these preconceived notions about industry, but saying that you were a pharmacist, saying that you practice, helps them feel a little bit more comfortable and build your credibility as well.
Right.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. Like that makes sense. It's just like, yeah, that's awesome that you're able to get that experience. And I guess I was kind of curious because you mentioned keeping in touch, like very current with the clinical knowledge. How do you, like, as your experience progresses, like from that clinical residency, how do you stay up to date and current with those type of topics for your field?
That's important. It's hard. I will say it's challenging because when you're not using something, like, they always say, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So I do have to work really hard to make sure I'm staying on top of things. So I tend to follow things like different, like, society. So for me, I'm actually in neurology now. So I follow different societies to stay on top of what's coming out, the data. Twitter is a big thing to know what's going on in the field and what's on people's minds, right? It's a useful tool. In terms of like my pharmacy knowledge that may not be applicable to what I do now, I still do a lot of reading. I actually do tutor students still. I did that in pharmacy school and continue to tutor students. And so that really challenges me to keep fresh and sharp on what I'm, on my clinical knowledge in general. But you just have to stay curious. It's a career of lifelong learning, and you really have to dedicate yourself to it because it's easy to get lost.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's cool. You tutor and stay up to date. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have time. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. And also we just kind of, I just kind of noticed that you had worked briefly at FAMU. I guess I was just kind of curious what that was like and how that kind of related to your career, or it did, and that's okay. Yeah. So I guess a little bit more about that experience and what that was like for you.
Yeah. So it was actually part of my program. So I did the FAMU BMS pharmaceutical industry residency. So as part of our first year, we actually had to lead a entire module, and we did other teaching throughout, but we were adjunct faculty, me and my co-resident. And I basically from scratch wrote the oncology module. We had to, it gives you a great appreciation for your professors, I must say. So, it's a few day module, but we had to come up with the content, the slides, the test material, the test questions, the lab. We had to orchestrate the lab and everything. Be ready for questions via email, etc. Right? Host office hours, all of that. And for me, it was definitely a challenge, but it was so much fun because I love to teach. That's where the tutoring comes in, and so that's where the adjunct professor part of my journey came from, is being within the embedded within the fellowship residency program that I did.
That's so cool. That's a cool additional piece that they have included in that.
Awesome. Yes, it's definitely different, but I had a lot of fun doing it.
did you find that using those skills, because I've noticed a lot of things that you've invested time in has to do with developing, the next generation of pharmacists, tutoring them, helping people around you grow. Do you find that those skills that you've built, through your pharmacy journey have helped you in your role as an MSL? And like what, I guess, skills and attributes and characteristics have you pulled from these internships and these residencies and fellowships where you find that these are really important that I use on a daily day basis?
Sure. There's so many things that I use. I mean, in terms of like, just wanting to pour back into others, there's so many people have poured into me. And so it's my way of paying it forward. And honestly, we're not going to do better as a profession if we just keep everything to ourselves. We have to continue to develop the next generation. And there have also been challenges, with COVID and everything that the students who are going through school now are dealing with. And so we really need to kind of pour into them and make sure that they are successful as well. But in terms of like all the other things I was involved with, right, I encourage others to not stretch themselves too thin, but get involved with a few things that are important to you. And if you really commit yourself, you gain a community, you learn things about yourself you may not have known, you learn what you like, what you don't like, and that allows you to kind of weed through some of that before you get into your career. Because everything that I found in these experiences, I realized aligned well with the role that I ultimately applied for, which is the MSL role. That's the role I'm doing now and love it. So, communicating, navigating, communication barriers, or learning how to communicate really complex information in a very, simplified way and to a different audience, right? It's staying sharp, right? Staying on top of your data, right? All of that's so important. And if you hold on to that, if you hold on to those key skills and really self-evaluate as you go along to make sure you are learning and with what you're doing, it really goes a long way. And those are all skills you can take with you.
No, that's really awesome. That's one thing I've tried to kind of improve is my interprofessional like skills, especially working alongside students, professors, faculty, whatnot, is being able to convey whatever message I'm trying to get out in a very clear and concise way that anyone can understand. So I think, for example, tutoring is a great way for someone to not only strengthen themselves in material, but also improve their ability to communicate with others, especially people who are struggling and don't know how to express what they're struggling on.
Absolutely. Asking probing questions, that's a big part of the job. So now I'm, tutoring definitely helps with that too.
Yeah, that's a good point. For I guess just in general, you kind of touched on some of these points, but what are some challenges you faced like along the way from pharmacy school into the industry, and what advice / tips would you have for students as they sort of navigate the similar path?
Yeah. Oh goodness, I'm sure there's so many challenges. I think some of the biggest challenges is just, the unknown, not knowing what to expect, because every student says this, everyone has gone through this, but a lot of folks feel like their school doesn't fully focus on the route that they're going down if they're interested in industry and any other non-traditional pathway, right? And it's not the school's fault. It's just that most students will go a clinical pathway, but there's so many other options. So I guess a challenge for me that I had to navigate was understanding what I was getting into. I needed to understand, okay, like I know that I like the skill sets being used and the opportunities being used within industry, but how do I get there? And so programs like PILS or other mentorship programs can really help students to, understand what they're getting into, understand what they like and what they don't like. So for instance, if you're applying to a fellowship and you are, not sure what therapeutic area that you want to go into, well, do some informational interviews, cold message folks on LinkedIn, ask them a little bit about what they do. Most people are comfortable and are happy to share. And that kind of gives you an idea of what you might want to pursue in the future. And so networking is super important for that. And then also just making sure you have close mentors. So somebody who has been in your shoes, maybe not too far along, that can give you, good feedback on your resume, on your letter of intent, etc., so that you kind of have someone to not necessarily hold your hand, but just to support you along the way.
Yeah, so I guess, yeah, that makes complete sense. Like a mentorship is such a, I think, overload component that's like very very
Yeah.
implicit in the curriculum, but not like explicitly said.
Mhm.
And so I guess what kind of like how might like students that are in the same position you specifically leverage experiences and like applications for a job or fellowship? Like what do you think is the most important piece there in terms of
In
bridging?
terms of like skill sets or
Yeah, skill sets, like
okay.
how to kind of start developing those skills that will equip you with the tools to be an MSL.
Oh, to be an MSL. Sure. I think, and I'll kind of generalize this here. One thing that's really helpful is if you look at, even if you're a student now, right? Look at a job description for the role that you're going for. And if you look at the job description, it will line out very clearly what skills they're looking for. While you may not have, dealt with a customer one-on-one and gone through data with them, etc., right? Or hosted a booth or manned or staffed a booth at a conference or anything, right? That's okay. There's always transferable skills. So if you look at most jobs within like the MSL realm, it's going to be communication, flexibility, adaptability, etc. Being able to communicate scientific information very clearly, relationship building. So all you have to do then is pull different experiences from school, from work, previous careers maybe that you've had, and speak to them. You don't have to have the fanciest title and of internship to be qualified. It could be being a hostess at a restaurant. You had to build a relationship. You had to do kind of customer management, right? These are all really key skills. You have to communicate effectively. Maybe you were a teacher before, right? Communicating effectively. So if you can speak in great detail to these experiences, you can show that you have the transferable skills to prepare you for that role. And there's so many opportunities within school that can give you those experiences as well.
Thank you. I'm sure that'll be really helpful for our listeners. So appreciate that.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I totally agree. I think that's really, really interesting. I guess my biggest question, I always ask this to everyone on the podcast, but for our student body, there's a lot of students who are struggling. We're struggling in pharmacy school. There are a lot of career options for us. We don't know what we're doing. Let's be frank.
Yeah, nobody does.
Yeah. What advice would you give to us? Like generalized advice to students as they kind of navigate this path of pharmacy as a career, with all the variety of career options, whether it's industry, clinical. What would you say was the most important advice you were given while you were navigating it that you could give back to now this next generation of pharmacists?
Sure. Oh, that's a big question. I would say be open-minded, and maybe that's cliche, but the reason I say that is because you are going to get a lot of experiences that you have no interest in. Okay? That's just the nature of it. You may have no interest in it, but I think the biggest thing that I always kept in mind is that there's always something to learn, no matter what it is. It could be if you're interested in industry, it could be an admin rotation, or it could be, operations rotations. There's always something to learn. So don't go in knowing or thinking I'm never going to use this anymore or ever in my life, so I'm not going to care, because then you're just wasting your time and your money. Right? So really, you just want to make sure that you go in and ask yourself, okay, well, what can I learn today? Or what did I learn today at the end of the day? And write it down, because these are all skills you can speak to in an interview. But if you choose to close yourself off, then you miss out on the opportunity to develop and learn. So I think that's the biggest thing, no matter what you're given, because you don't always have the full choice,
Right.
or, selection of what you get. Just go in with an open mind, because there's always something you can learn.
No, definitely. I definitely have learned that, especially in our curriculum. Like there are a lot of disease states that we learn in our therapy and ecology courses where I'm like, this is something I may not necessarily be interested in. For one, I haven't seen it in a clinical setting, so I can't throw it away, but it's information and you can use that information in any way whatsoever when it's applicable. So I think being open-minded with that is definitely helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Always something to learn.
Always, always. And I guess my last question, very, very, this could be very broad, this could be very deep. It's up to you. But
Okay.
as an MSL, and I guess for you who's very career oriented, where do you foresee yourself within like the next 5 to 10 years? Or where do you see, I guess, the career of an MSL, or specifically with you or in general in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a big question too.
I'm
It's a
sorry.
question I ask myself. No, this is good. Wow. So it's honestly a question. I'll be fully transparent. It's a question I ask myself a lot because, to be honest, I'm always the person that I know, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and to the rest of the steps, right? Like I
Right.
know everything that I want to do, and I always have a plan. And this has been the first time I think in my life where I don't know what's going to come next, right? And so I'm kind of taking my own advice and being open-minded in terms of, what is my, what my journey might look like. I have some ideas of what I might be interested in as a next step in my career. So for instance, because I love tutoring and teaching other folks, I am interested in maybe like a trainer role for MSLs. They have MSL trainers, so
Yeah.
you kind of develop the curriculum and keep the team up to date and so forth. So there's strategy behind it. So that's an idea that I have, but I don't know. I don't know what my future will hold. But what I've decided to do, instead of thinking so far into the future, is really focus on getting really good at what I do now, right? And then opportunities will arise that I may not have imagined. So that's what my focus has been since I started the role about a year ago. Is I want to be the best MSL I possibly can, and from there, let's explore. Let's see what I really like to do. Maybe it's getting into clinical development. Maybe it's being a manager. Maybe it's being a trainer, or maybe it's getting into medical strategy. I don't know, but I think right now I'm really focusing on, what I'm doing now and just perfecting or getting better with those skills.
That's a great way to look at it. It's kind of like look what's right in front of you and just be the best at it as possibly as you can. And things, as a cliche as well, doors will open. But yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. If anyone have any more questions or okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us on. I know the pharmacy students listening or pre-pharmacy students listening will have learned a lot from this and your experiences. So thank you so much again for coming on. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course.
You all take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you again for your continued support and watching all of our content. Feel free to subscribe, like, and reshare. And also, our new consulting business created by our co-founders is now live. So go hop on to that Instagram bio and fill out that Google form if you're interested in a pharmaceutical industry internship. Thank you again for your support and have a great day.